All right, now we're here for the reason why we showed up, so we can hear from Miss Ann Murdoch today. So let me start with a couple of little for you. Have you ever had to make a difficult transition in your life? Have you ever been part of a team or group and realized that even though none of you were like the others, everything just clicked? Have you ever felt that you were holding back and not letting people see you really, who you really are deep, deep inside? That's a big If you answered yes or to any of those questions, then you are in the right place today. Our speaker today has made the remarkable transition from living as an outwardly successful but deeply depressed man to living her true, authentic, joyful self as Ann. She learned the art of team building and leadership from some of the military's best, and her work in diversity and inclusion has had a measurable impact on making the Army better. On breezy days, you might see her zipping around the Potomac on her little sailboat, or exploring local trails on her bicycle. Just doing it all. Here to help unite our vision by engaging each other, please join me in welcoming from Springfield, Virginia, speaker, activist, and a woman who has seen every Will Ferrell movie. I know. I started laughing when I read that too. Miss Ann Murdoch.
Well, good afternoon, Noah. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Who is feeling proud today? Come on. Who's ready to celebrate? Well, then you're definitely in the right place. I'm super, super excited to be here. But, okay, I do have to just say I am just a little bit disappointed about one thing. I thought for sure that the Atmospheric Administration would have a rainbow out for Pride observance. I guess that's probably the first weather joke you've ever heard, right? So original. But I would like to thank everybody, seriously, everybody that put this together, James Trame, Michelle Moore, and Kenneth Bailey for inviting me here. I'm really honored to be here. And I do want to say on a serious note that I'm very grateful for the work that Noah does. You contribute so much to our economy and the body of scientific knowledge. And as a private pilot, I stake my life on Noah products. And I'm still here, so thank you so much for everything you do. I know it's often dangerous and thankless, and you don't get enough credit for what you do, but so I'm very grateful to be here. Before I get started, I do just want to tell you why I'm here. I served in the Army for 24 years, and when I retired, I received a Legion of Merit, and I had a Bronze Star, and I had a bunch of other awards. And I had a bunch of plaques and things like that I could hang on the wall, and all that kind of good stuff. But I had something else with me. Something that I carried around. It was a secret. That secret could have got me fired, put out of my career, lose my retirement. It could have cost me potentially my family and who knows what else. And I wasn't stealing. I wasn't giving away government secrets. I wasn't hurting anybody or doing anything like that. My secret, I was disguised as a man. And that led to some pretty dark times. There was a lot of nights in Afghanistan on the dark nights where at the end of a long day, 14, 16 hours, whatever, I'd go back to my hooch and I'd pull out my pistol, I'd pull out the magazine, and I'd say, I have a solution right here in my hands. If it gets too bad, it's here if I need it. And that's what I took comfort from. Can you imagine? But today, I'm living a life that I once dared hardly even dream about. Sometimes I'm just walking down the street and I go, I just can't believe it. This is so awesome. And part of the reason I'm here is because so many people help me out. People just like you here in this room. So many allies and members of the LGBTQ plus community and just other people that were willing to lend a hand and be kind. And I think that if the lessons that I learned from getting to where I was to where I am now, and what I've seen on other people's journeys and what I've read about, if that can help somebody else, then I am duty bound to try to help people with that and share that knowledge and that experience. When I was in the Army, at the Pentagon, I helped make the Army a more diverse place. I worked in the Army Diversity and Inclusion Office and helped make the officer corps more diverse when I was Chief of Officer Sessions. When Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, I was responsible for revising 7 Army regulations to take all that stuff out so that gay people could serve openly and proudly, except that didn't apply to me. So I know what it's like to serve with people from all around the world and to be on these teams that are just really dynamic because you have people from different experiences, different walks of life, different parts of the world, different colors, different backgrounds, different schooling, working together as a team to just solve the toughest, most complex problems. I know what it's like to be supported at work when I transitioned as a civilian later on. But I know what it's like to have to hide. I know what it's like to be scared. And I know what it's like to hold back because of who I am. And I can only imagine what more I might have been able to contribute to a very successful career had I been able to just be open and be myself. It took years, gallons of tears, and a lot of hard work to get where I am today, but it was worth every step. I didn't ask for this journey. I didn't ask to be on this path, but I've been blessed to meet some of the most amazing people in the LGBTQ plus community, and not just gay, trans, and other people, but allies and family members. And I think that if I can take my experiences working with diverse and inclusive teams and spread that out, then that's going to help everybody. Pride isn't a once-a-year thing. It's a conversation. And today, that conversation starts on the streets of Greenwich Village in New York City. Oops, didn't expect that. Okay, I'm trying to be dramatic, but not that dramatic. Do that a little more gently. Police were taking the place. At 1:20 a.m. on June 28, 1969, Inspector Seymour Pine and a handful of New York City police raided the Stonewall Inn. Now, the Stonewall was one of a handful of gay bars that was owned by the Mafia at the time. You see, being gay was essentially illegal. And the Mafia had to deal with the police. They would pay off the police, and somebody would tip off the bartenders before a raid happened. Stonewall was just a little bit different than most of the other gay bars because it was a haven for the transgendered homeless people that lived in the park across the street. They weren't allowed in most gay bars. They were the outcasts of outcasts. And apparently the Mafia decided that Stonewall wasn't worth the investment. So they stopped paying bribes on it. And the police decided to retaliate by closing the Stonewall down. Except the raid didn't go as planned. The paddy wagons to haul off the detainees didn't show up. And instead of dispersing like they usually did, the crowd stuck around. And soon they were joined by passerby and other people on the streets, and they started protesting. No one knows exactly how the melee started, but a lot of witnesses said that it was a young trans woman being hauled off in handcuffs that appealed to the crowd for help. And they started throwing stuff. They started throwing coins and garbage and other stuff. And the police retreated back into the Stonewall with some of the detainees in tow. Can you imagine being dragged back into the bar in handcuffs after you were just dragged out of the bar a few minutes ago? And the police used the payphone that was inside of the bar to call for backup. And the dreaded tactical police force arrived. They were hardened veterans of bloody riots, anti-Civil War riots, I would say Civil War, anti-war riots and civil rights demonstrations. And they were pissed. They were out to prove that nobody gets the better of the NYPD, much less a bunch of gay people and trans people. And they were there in their full riot gear, their helmets, their shields, and their clubs. And they were ready to crack skulls, and they were good at it. And they started advancing on the crowd. And as it got closer and closer, and the showdown got closer and closer, the crowd responded in the only way that anybody would expect. They formed a kick line and started singing. We are the Stonewall Girls. We wear our hair in curls. We don't wear underwear. We show our pubic hair. And now you just know I'm not in the singing business, right? But that's so emblematic of our community that when the times really got tough, not only did they stand up for themselves, but they did it with humor. But the police responded in force, and the melee lasted for several days with dozens of injuries. Writer and activist James Baldwin said, "Folks can change their ways as much as they want to. I don't care how many times you change your ways. What's in you is in you, and it's got to come out." And people have been coming out ever since Stonewall. There have been other groups before Stonewall working for gay rights, but Stonewall was a catalyst for much more visible confrontational groups and a much more confrontational style of activism, which really played out later during the AIDS crisis in the 80s. Since 1978, the rainbow flag has been the symbol of the LGBTQ plus equality movement. When sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act like a prism and form a rainbow. That quote has special meaning for me, and maybe one or two others in this room are listening over the internet. A rainbow is huge. It stretches from horizon to horizon. And my spouse said, "You can't tell Noah about rainbows and atmospheric stuff," but I think I'm okay here. It's a sign of hope. It's in the first story. It was one of the first stories in the Bible, God's covenant with people, the story of Noah. We think of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, Lucky Charms, and they're magically delicious, and a leprechaun, and it's great, And who can forget Judy Garland singing so movingly about hope somewhere over the rainbow? It's inclusive. It's billions of droplets of water suspended in the sky, all working together to form a thing of magnificent beauty. And it's inclusive. There's an infinite variation of colors, all blending together, any one of which would just be a stripe. And, okay, let me just tell you a quick little story about a rainbow. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was canoeing with my kids, and they were probably about 14 and 11 at the time, and we're on the Shenandoah River. And we got caught in a thunderstorm. We stood there on the shore through an entire downpour, and we had miles to go, and they were done. They were tired. They were hungry. They were wet, and they just wanted to get off that river and go home. And they kept saying, "How much further? How much further?" And, "Oh, it's just around the next bend. It's just around the next bend. It's just around the next bend." Well, finally, we actually did get around the very last bend. And there, at our takeout point, was this rainbow up in the sky with one end on one side of the river and the other end on the other side of the river, framing the verdant mountains of Virginia in silhouette or highlighted against the dark storm clouds. And never in the history of the world did a beat-up old Dodge Caravan look so good. And like a rainbow, the LGBTQ plus community is large. We heard there's approximately 11 million people that identify as LGBTQ. It's hopeful and resilient. Gilbert Baker, who designed the rainbow flag, had this in mind when he designed it. He said, "The Nazis had a whole code of emblems that they used to oppress people, and we needed something to answer that." And he added that it was perfect because of its associations with beauty and nature. Resilience is important. We've endured the AIDS crisis, and we've lost people like Harvey Milk and Matthew Shepard. Violence, discrimination, and harassment are well documented, as are disparities in housing, healthcare, and employment. Approximately 40% of transgender people have attempted suicide. And from my personal experience, almost 100% of trans people have a suicide story. Think about that for a second. Let that sink in. 100% almost. Because of the shame and the discrimination. Every year, approximately 2,000 trans people are murdered simply for being trans. Mostly women of color. And just in the last few months, Ashika Carmen and Zoe Spears were murdered right here in Maryland, not very far from here. And if you ever get the chance, on November 20th is the International Transgender Day of Remembrance. And it'd be great if you could find a observance near you and attend. It's very powerful. But in spite of all that, the LGBTQ plus community keeps getting stronger and stronger and better and better. We're inclusive. If you say you're LGBTQ plus, you are. That's what I love about this community, is everybody's looking for better ways to be more inclusive and think about who we left out, who else needs to be brought into the conversation. And it's been so supportive, and people really look out for each other. It's far, far, far from perfect, but it's really an awesome community to be part of, and I'm just amazed sometimes at the people that I'm with. And it's diverse. The letters LGBTQ stand for lesbian, gay, transgender, questioning. We heard there's a lot of other identities that are being added at an almost dizzying pace, such as questioning, intersex, androgynous, non-binary, two-spirited, and on and on and on, poly. Bisexual people are increasingly raising their voices, seeking to be recognized. People like Oregon Governor Kate Brown and Arizona U.S. Senator Kirsten Sinema. And then there is the T. Now, you probably already know this, but I'll just say it, that gender identity is often conflated with sexual orientation, and it's not the same. Gender identity is who you are. Sexual orientation is who you love. It's about 0.6% of the U.S. population that identifies some version of trans. It's actually a minority that seeks medical or surgical intervention. And it's a minority of people that have socially transitioned from one gender to the other, as I have done. Previously, it's becoming more equal now, but transgender women seem to be more visible than transgender men, but it's roughly about equal. It's a broad term that covers a variety of gender expressions, such as non-binary, people that don't identify as either male or female. And it kind of challenges us to think of new ways and new versions of, not versions, but new ways of describing ourselves. There's people that identify as two-spirited, which is an ancient Native American tradition. There's people that identify as gender fluid. They feel more masculine sometimes and more feminine at other times, and they sort of move between the spectrum, move around the spectrum. Some people, like myself, have been clinically diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which I describe as the unrelenting feeling that your internal sense of self, your inner identity, doesn't match your external body or your outer identity. And for me, it's every hour of every day. It never stops and it never goes away. But I'm free of the guilt and shame now. So that's really good. And research is pointing to an increasingly complex array of factors that lead to our gender identities. Things like chromosomes and hormones and brain structure and physiology and possibly even social factors. So suffice it to say, it's very complex, and it's way, way, way more complex than either or. Now, I don't want to come off as like the be-all and end-all of gender identity, because I'm still actually kind of new at this. This is, believe it or not, my first gender transition. So. So Pride Month means many things to many people. It's a time of celebration. It's a time to honor those we lost along the way. It's a time to reflect back on how far we've come. And it's a time to chart the work that remains to be done. But for me, it's a time to really embrace how joyous it is to just be myself and to live free and have that freedom to be ourselves. No matter how we identify or who you feel yourself to be, we're at our best when our inner identities and our outer identities match. And they can get out of whack. Sometimes an employer or a family member or society tells you have to cover up who you are or change who you are. Other times we outgrow one identity, such as when we transition from childhood to adulthood. And other times we're forced by circumstances to adjust, perhaps due to an illness or a serious medical diagnosis. When those identities, the inner and the outer identity, are out of whack, it creates conflict. Sometimes it can create inner turmoil, and it can result in physiological symptoms like high blood pressure or other problems. Or it can spill out socially like it did at Stonewall 50 years ago. I know firsthand how hard and how scary it is to risk a lifetime of achievements and relationships and privilege to align my outer and inner self. My friend Connie described gender transition as if you have your life story laid out on a Scrabble board. And you take that board and you flip it up in the air and you have no idea where the tiles are going to land or where your story will go from there. And that applies to a lot of other transitions. I've seen it play out when people retire from the military. I've seen it play out when people have changes in their relationships or when they need to move and other transitions like that. And we have to navigate a whole range of things that we might not expect. We're almost hardwired to value risk over reward. So things can seem really, really scary, even though rationally we know maybe we shouldn't be that scared. There can be feelings of grief that we're not really expecting. And we might think, why would we be grieving at a time that we've been really looking forward to? But I think that anybody that's been to a graduation, whether it's one of your own or especially if it's a graduation of a child, understands that feeling of joy and hope and excitement, but that other feeling of loss and mourning for what you're leaving behind. So the two go hand in hand, and sometimes the grief can sneak up in really unexpected ways and surprise us. And sometimes there's just so much to do to accomplish a transition that it can be really overwhelming. When I came out, people started describing me in terms like radiant and glowing, and they said I never smiled that much. They'd never seen me smile that much before. Almost overnight, I stopped taking antidepressants and medication for an ulcer, and my blood pressure returned to normal, and my insomnia got better, and I stopped having anxiety attacks just because I could finally be me. Now, I thought that when I came out and became, a full-fledged member of the LGBTQ community, I'd get like some kind of card or certificate or something like that, but that didn't happen, And, I thought maybe I'll have to do the trans agenda. But I found out that, my trans agenda is walking the dog, going to the grocery store, going to work, taking my unicorn to the vet. No, seriously, I have to. Because she was at a karaoke night, and she blew out her voice at karaoke night, and now she's a little hoarse. So, estrogen hormone replacement therapy fixed a lot of things for me, but it didn't fix my sense of humor, so sorry about that. But there's a saying in the trans community that when one person transitions, everybody else around them has to transition as well. And that's true on the job. But, it's really very simple. Because when our inner and our outer selves are aligned, we're happier. When we're happier, we're more engaged and productive at work. And when we're more engaged and productive at work, their agency, the company, the nonprofit, whatever group we're in, benefits. Simple, right? But diversity is like rocket fuel. When it's handled properly, you can take off and reach great heights. When it's handled improperly, it can blow up on the launch pad and everybody suffers. So it takes intentional effort. We have to actively seek out people that don't think like us. It's even more than people that don't look like us. There's a whole range of dimensions of diversity. And sexual orientation and gender identity are some of those factors. We have to be willing to let go of our preconceived ideas and notions and put down our pet rocks when there's a better way. It can be hard. It can be challenging. Now, it's not so hard for everybody. I was checking with my kids shortly before I transitioned full time, and I asked my daughter how she was doing, and she said, "I'm getting ready to start high school. I have bigger problems than a transgender dad." But what really drove it home for me, the ability to bring your whole self to work, was shortly after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, when I attended the promotion ceremony for an Air Force officer. And after her rank was pinned on, she leaned over and she kissed her wife. And she was promoted to lieutenant colonel, so it was at least her third promotion. And it was the first time that they could be up there as a couple enjoying this milestone in her career, just like every other married couple in the military. Finally. And that's all I needed to know. The LGBTQ plus community is a perfect example of the power of diversity and inclusion. We heard about the different letters and all the umbrella groups that are under that. An LGBTQ plus community slices across every other demographic measure that there is. Age, ethnicity, geographic location, education level, socioeconomic status, everything. And we've accomplished so much in such a relatively short amount of time. It's really pretty amazing. And I think that's how the LGBTQ plus community is going to save the world. If we can share that and spread that inclusion and that support and just lift everybody up with us. So, we've talked about Stonewall, we've talked about rainbows and Dodge minivans and all that kind of stuff. But you haven't heard my story yet. And everything I've read about effective public speaking says, tell a story. So I offer myself as a case study in why it takes a rainbow. And I caution that I'm a sample population of one. And there's a saying that once you know one trans person, you know one trans person. But here's my story. Once upon a time, there was a princess and a prince named me. And one day they noticed they were different, and that one's a boy and one's a girl. How could this be, they wondered? We're the same person. But they didn't think too much about it, and they just played and did whatever kids did before the internet. Maybe some of you remember those days. But they also found out there was dragons back then. And one was called homophobia. Another was called misogyny. Another was called transphobia. And they spit evil potions at people like shame and guilt. And they cast evil spells like depression and anxiety. And the princess and the prince were scared. They didn't know what to do. And finally they came up with a plan. The princess would hide in a big, tall tower with thick stone walls and a sturdy door and a strong lock. And the prince would take the key and go out and figure out what to do with the dragons. And that way they'd be safe until they could figure out what to do. The prince took the key and he thought to himself, if nobody finds out about the princess, the dragons will leave us alone. This is only till we can figure out what to do. I can do this. I can do this. The princess tried to make the best of it. She tried to make herself as comfortable as possible. It's not so bad in here, she'd say. I can peek out the window at night when there's nobody around, and it's only until we can figure out what to do. I'll be free. Eventually. But the prince fell in love. He met a beautiful woman, and they had a beautiful family, and he became a warrior, and they traveled across the land defending the nation, and everything was going great, except for that damn princess. The princess was getting restless. She kept trying to get out of the tower. She said, "Please let me out, please. I'm getting older, and I don't know how much longer I can last in here, and I don't want to die in here, and nobody ever knew I existed. Please let me out, please." But the prince said, "No, if the dragons find out about you, they'll kill us, and there won't be anybody to protect the beautiful family. You have to stay in there." And she said, "I can help. Please let me out." But the prince wouldn't listen. And every night, the dragons clawed, and they bit, and they sprayed him with fire, and they dragged him closer and closer to their pit where they could kill him and eat him. And the princess said, "I can help too. I love the beautiful family too. I'm sweet and I'm nice. And I think they'll like me. Please let me help." But the prince wouldn't listen. And some nights, he just wanted to give up. Let the dragons drag him to their pit. But every night he said, "Tomorrow. I'll quit tomorrow, but not today." Until finally, in desperation, he went to a wise wizard named Martha, who had helped many others like him and the princess before. Martha said, "The princess is right. The only chance is for you and the princess to fight the dragons together." And so they did. And it was hard. They got bitten and clawed and sprayed with fire. And they didn't know if they'd make it. But they kept trying. And as they did, they encountered others on the way that had been there before and walked the same journey, who could tell them what the road was like up ahead. And they met healers and clergy and allies and other people that helped them. And they formed a great rainbow army. So with the great rainbow army at their side, the prince and the princess started to gain the upper hand. Until one day, the dragons were dead. The prince was tired. He'd spent so many years fighting wars and fighting dragons. The princess was stoked from fighting dragons. She was raring to go and see what came next. And so, on August 13th, 2016, the prince retired. And the princess gently took his crown and ascended the throne. And it's personal. This is the part where I'm supposed to say, "And they lived happily ever after." But my story is still being written. And it keeps getting better and better and better. And it keeps getting better because of people like you in this room. People who think, what policies do we need to have in place so people know that they're welcome here and that they're included? Who else needs to be brought into the conversation? Who's not represented? Whose Rainbow Army can I be part of? Pride Month isn't once a year thing. It's a conversation. We need to keep that conversation going. So this Pride Month, whether you identify as bisexual, polysexual, gay, straight, whether you identify as cisgender, transgender, non-gender, gender non-conforming, or any other variety, whether you identify as a family member or an ally, or however you identify, grab hold of the rainbow, enjoy the celebration, and show your pride. Thank you.
very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing your story. You kind of set us up a little bit because we were going through this little all about the whole community overall, and then you put your story out there, and we really appreciate it. So we want to thank you for your inspiring presentation. I can't even get it out. Presentation and exposing yourself and your story, because you didn't have to do that. So we appreciate it. And I believe that when you do things like that, people get a better insight into you, the individual, as well as the community overall. But we are all unique and different in our own ways. So we appreciate that. Let's give Ms. Murdoch another round of applause. Thank you all so much. At this time, I want to bring Jim up to help me to give a small token of our appreciation to Ms. Murdoch. So, Ms. Murdoch, if you would come back.